If you quit after 287 days, the problem is usually not the market. The problem is that you expected compounding to flatter you too early. That is one of the costliest misunderstandings in personal finance. People are told that compounding is powerful. That is true. They are told that time is their greatest ally. That is also true. What they are not told clearly enough is that the beginning of compounding often feels insulting. You save, you invest, you watch the number, you save again, you invest again. Months pass, sometimes a year passes, then another, and the account still looks so ordinary that you begin wondering whether the people praising compounding were either lying or talking about somebody else's life. That is where most futures are damaged. Not in the crash, not in the recession, not in the year the market behaves badly. The future is usually damaged in the quiet stage, when the investor looks at the account, feels no emotional reward, and quietly concludes that patience must be another word for being fooled. I have watched that happen for a very long time. A person does the correct thing. He contributes, he buys broad productive assets. He does not speculate wildly. He does not pretend to know the next quarter. He is trying honestly to build a better life. Then the scoreboard appears to insult him, and once the scoreboard insults him, a thought enters the room. Maybe this is too slow. That thought has destroyed a shocking amount of future wealth, not because it is irrational, because it arrives right before the process becomes meaningful. I think that is one of the least understood truths in money. The first stage of compounding is not abundance. It is disbelief. Your eyes look at the account and say, "Is this all?" Your effort says, "I have already done enough to deserve more evidence than this." Your emotions say, "If the first years look this small, perhaps the next years will too." That is the trap. The first years are not there to make you feel rich. They are there to make the engine possible. That is a different assignment, and the investor who confuses those assignments almost always quits in the dull chapter, which means he leaves the field before the machine has had a chance to matter. I want to explain this through a framework I would use if I were starting over today, without the comfort of being Warren Buffett, without the money, without the history, without the reputation, and with only the ordinary conditions most people actually live inside. Not as a fund manager, not as a television economist, as a normal person trying to keep faith with the process long enough for the process to stop looking ridiculous. The framework is simple. I call it the 8-4-3 rule. It is not magic. It is not a guarantee. It is not a chart trick. It is a patient structure. 8 years to build the engine, 4 years for the engine to begin sharing the work. 3 years where the engine starts doing enough labor that your relationship with the account changes. The numbers are not laws of physics. They are a way of correctly reading the experience that matters, because the experience is where most people fail. I once spent time with a man I will call Daniel. Daniel was not a finance professional. He was not trying to become one. He worked the evening desk at a hotel, rotating between late shifts, weekend shifts, and those strange half-exhausted hours where the rest of the city seems to be either going out or going home while you are still handing people key cards and apologizing for things the air conditioning did to them in room 417. He took home just over $3,400 a month when the shifts were full. Some months a little more, some months less. He shared a cramped apartment with a cousin. His coffee came mostly from vending machines and bad lobby urns. He kept telling himself he would begin for real once life became less awkward. That sentence should frighten you. I will begin for real when life settles down. There are millions of people saying that to themselves right now, and life almost never answers by becoming simpler first. Daniel did what many people do when they know, vaguely, that they should start investing. He watched a few clips, he downloaded an app, he promised himself he would be disciplined, he made a small purchase in a broad index fund, then the market dipped. His account was smaller than what he had put in. He felt mildly offended, he waited, he bought again. Then it rose a little, then it dropped again. Months went by, the balance moved, but not in any emotionally satisfying way. One evening he said something I have heard in 100 variations. "I do not think this thing is broken. I think I am just too small for it to matter." That sentence is half true, which is why it is so dangerous. Yes, the account is small. No, the process is not failing. It is only still in the stage where you are doing almost all the lifting. That is the part people must understand. In the early years, compounding is not doing the majority of the work. Your contributions matter more than the returns. Your behavior matters more than the market. Your consistency matters more than your intelligence. Because you are doing so much of the lifting, the process feels unimpressive. It feels manual. It feels as if every dollar of progress came from your own labor anyway, which leads to the obvious emotional question, if I am doing all the work, why not spend the money instead and wait until later to build wealth? That is the voice that ruins the whole enterprise. The answer is because those early years are not there to impress you. They are there to create mass. Mass is what compounding needs. An account with very little mass can produce only very small visible effects. An account with serious mass begins behaving like a separate worker. That change is the handoff. The handoff is what almost everybody wants. The handoff is what almost nobody reaches because they quit in the insulting phase. That is why I like the 8-4-3 rule. It forces honesty. The first 8 years are engine building years, not glamorous years, not look at me years, not years where you should expect the market to flatter your ego every month. They are the years where you become the kind of person who can keep buying without applause. And that identity matters more than people think. The wrong way to build an investor is through motivation. Motivation is emotional sugar. It works beautifully until it disappears, which it always does. The right way to build an investor is through structure. Structure is what remains when your mood is tired, when the market is rude, when your checking account is strained, and when the account does not yet look like proof. Daniel eventually understood this. His problem was not that he needed more inspiration. He needed a system that was too small to resist and too regular to forget. So he built one around the end of his shift. Every night he clipped his hotel badge off his shirt at the employee exit. That became his cue. Badge off meant one question. Did I buy my future today? The question was deliberately narrow. Not am I winning, not am I rich yet. Not is the market attractive tonight. Only did I buy my future today. If the answer was yes, he went home. If the answer was no, he opened his brokerage app right there before leaving the parking lot and bought a small amount of a broad index fund. Sometimes it was $32, sometimes $47, some $60. One after a good tip week, the amount was almost embarrassing. That is why it worked, because it did not require a heroic month. It required a repeatable act. Same cue, same action, badge off, future purchase. That is the kind of mechanism I trust. People imagine that wealth is built through giant acts of discipline. Very often it is built through tiny acts attached to something you already do. A person with a reliable cue and a repeatable move is much more dangerous financially than a person full of temporary passion. Daniel also made another crucial change. He stopped tracking the account mainly in dollars. He tracked shares. This sounds small. It is not. The early years of investing become emotionally distorted when you look only at dollar value. The dollar value swings. The dollar value can go backward for months. The dollar value can make you feel stupid even when you are doing the right thing. Shares tell a different story. Shares reveal accumulation. When the market falls, the dollar value looks worse, but the shares bought for each new contribution rise. That is not a trick. That is the mechanism. And the mechanism is easier to stay loyal to when the scoreboard reflects what the stage actually requires. In the early years, the win is not growth. The win is accumulation. If you mislabeled the stage, you misread the progress. Daniel wrote the share count on a small index card and taped it inside the closet door of his room. Every Sunday he updated one number, just one. The total shares owned, the account balance could insult him all it wanted. The shares told the truth. The truth was that the pile was getting bigger. That matters because the mind needs some honest proof that the boring behavior is not empty. The share count is much better proof in the engine, building years, than the fluctuating market value. Now let me explain the 8-4-3 rule more clearly. The first 8 years are where you do almost all the labor. That does not mean the market contributes nothing. It means the visible contribution from the market is still too small relative to your effort to be emotionally satisfying. Suppose you invest an average of $250 a month. That is $3,000 a year. At the end of 1 year, even with decent returns, the account is still mostly a story about your contributions. At the end of 2 years, still mostly you. At the end of 3 years, still mostly you. This is where many people go wrong. They look at year 3 and conclude year 15 will feel the same. That is as foolish as looking at a seedling and concluding the tree is permanently useless because it cannot yet hold a swing. The early stage is not meant to feel like the later stage. It is meant to make the later stage possible. Daniel stayed with it, not perfectly. That is another point people miss. Compounding does not require perfection. It requires loyalty. There were months he invested less. There were 2 ugly months where his contribution was barely half of what he wanted because a cousin lost work and rent dynamics changed inside the apartment. There was 1 month where the car needed urgent repairs and he contributed only a token amount, but he protected the streak. That mattered more than the size. People focus too much on the ideal amount and too little on continuity. Continuity is what teaches identity. If you keep showing up, the account may still look small, but your character is becoming useful. And character is the one thing the market cannot replace for you. Around year 5, Daniel started encountering the second temptation. The first temptation in compounding is quitting because it feels too slow. The second temptation is interrupting the machine for life. Inconveniences, a repair bill, a move, a wedding, a temporary period of bad cash flow, an invitation to finally do something enjoyable because you have been so good for so long. This is where emergency reserves matter. I do not want anybody throwing all spare money into the market while life remains one random repair away from liquidation. That is not strength, that is recklessness. Daniel had understood that part too before his contributions became serious. He built a basic cash buffer. Not because cash is exciting, because cash prevents stupidity. When his transmission failed and the repair bill came in ugly, he did not sell the shares. He covered part of the cost from cash and then took extra shifts for 2 weeks to refill the reserve. That decision mattered more than the amount because it proved the portfolio was not his checking account wearing a more sophisticated costume. It was the future, and the future should not be sold for every present inconvenience. This is one reason I think the wrong financial system can ruin a good investor before the market ever gets the chance to help him. If a person has no liquidity, then every bad week becomes a potential reason to sell good assets. Then he looks back years later and blames the market for failing him. Often the market did not fail him. His structure did. Structure is more important than inspiration. It always will be. Now, by the time Daniel approached year 8, something subtle had changed. He was not rich, far from it. But the account no longer felt like a ceremonial little side project. It had weight. His total contributions had passed the point where the account itself could add a noticeable amount in a good year. The market's work was still smaller than his, but it was no longer trivial. This is the engine-built moment. I think most investors need to name it somehow because naming a stage helps them remain inside it. Daniel bought a little metal toy engine from a secondhand store and put it on the shelf above his desk. Not because he was childish, because he needed a physical reminder of what was really happening. This is not supposed to look dramatic yet, he told himself. It is supposed to be running. That is wisdom. The world trains people to judge progress by spectacle. Spectacle is a terrible measure for compounding. The account does not need to look impressive in year 8. It needs to have become self-reinforcing enough that quitting now would be a genuine act of self-sabotage. That is the handoff point. You are no longer building from zero. You have built the engine. Now comes the next 4 years. This is the most psychologically dangerous phase after the beginning, but for a different reason. Years 9 through 12 are where many investors begin confusing survival with skill. A few good years arrive. The account grows faster. The annual gains begin resembling multiple months of contributions. The owner starts feeling smart. That is when a new weakness enters. Overconfidence. People start thinking the market has recognized their intelligence. The market has recognized their staying power. Those are not the same thing. Daniel did one thing very well in this phase. He stayed boring. That may be the highest compliment I know how to give an investor in the middle years. He kept buying the broad fund. He kept tracking shares. He kept the badge ritual. He did not suddenly start pretending. He was now qualified to forecast sectors, rotate aggressively, short weak companies, or pick moonshot names because a few good years had finally arrived. That restraint saved him. The middle years are where people often ruin themselves because the account finally gives them enough pleasure to trigger vanity. Vanity is expensive. Boring is profitable. By year 10, Daniel had a strange sensation for the first time. A good market month could add more to the account than some of his monthly contributions. That is not the final stage. It is the beginning of the handoff. This is what the 843 rule is trying to teach. First, you do the work. Then you and the money share the work. Later, the money begins doing more visible work than you. People think compounding is slow because they are always emotionally standing in stage 1, asking stage 3 questions. They want the final feeling before they have built the mass. That is not how the machine works. The machine needs time and matter. Contributions are matter. Time is time. Nothing can negotiate with that. Now we reach the final 3 years in the framework, years 13 through 15. This is where the process starts feeling different in your body, not just on a spreadsheet. The account now has enough mass that a decent market year begins producing gains that feel almost disrespectful relative to the original effort. You look at the annual change and realize the market has done a quantity of labor that would once have required you to work for months. This is the stage everyone admires from the outside. They call it compounding magic. They call you disciplined, they call you lucky. What they do not see is that this stage was decided in the earlier years when nothing looked magical at all. That is why I insist the boring chapter is the real chapter. The visible reward comes later. The decisive behavior comes first. At this stage, Daniel had another moment that changed him permanently. He looked at 1 year's gain and noticed that the account had earned more than his total annual contributions in several of the earlier years. That is the day the process stops feeling theoretical. That is the day you understand that you are no longer pushing the full vehicle yourself. The vehicle is rolling. That is what most people quit before seeing. And they quit because they mistook early slowness for failure instead of recognizing it as the price of admission. I want to say something directly to the person who is in year 1, year 2, year 4, or year 6 of this process. If you feel underwhelmed, that is not evidence against compounding. That feeling is built into the design. The design is not there to flatter your nervous system. It is there to produce a mathematical reality that later generations of your own life will thank you for. The reason the first stage feels so difficult is precisely because your contributions are still doing most of the visible work. That is not a flaw. It is the natural order of the thing. A farmer is not angry at an orchard in year 2 because it does not yet resemble year 15. He understands sequence. Investors often do not. They keep uprooting the orchard to check whether the roots are trying hard enough. That is madness. What should you do instead? First, stop asking compounding to entertain you. That is the wrong contract. Compounding is not a streaming service. It will not keep you engaged on demand. Its job is not pleasure. Its job is accumulation and acceleration over long periods of correct behavior. Second, buy broad productive enterprise unless you truly have the skill, time, and temperament to do something more concentrated. For most people, a broad index fund is not a compromise. It is a magnificent tool when you buy it. You are not betting on one management team, one story, one sector, or one prediction. You are buying a large slice of productive enterprise across the economy. That matters because whole economies recover from conditions that kill individual firms. A broad low cost fund allows you to participate in that recovery without needing to pick the exact survivor in every fight. Third, attach the buying habit to a cue you cannot avoid. Not payday if payday makes the whole ritual too easy to skip or too emotionally tied to whatever chaos the month brought. Attach it to something stable. The end of the workday, your lunch break, the moment you park at home, brushing your teeth at night, something real, something repeatable. Same cue, same action. That is how habits survive low motivation. Fourth, track the truthful score. If you are in the early years, track shares or units accumulated, not just the market value. The market value will lie to your emotions in the wrong direction at exactly the wrong time. The accumulation count tells you whether your behavior is building mass. That is what matters first. Fifth, build a penalty against quitting, not a melodramatic penalty. A simple one. Tell a friend you owe him $50 if you liquidate in panic without a true emergency. Put friction in front of emotional exits. The market does not need your emotions to be smooth. It needs your exits to be expensive enough that you stop confusing feelings with commands. Sixth, increase the contribution as life improves. This matters enormously. A static contribution helps. A rising contribution changes lives. If your income grows, a portion of each increase should automatically flow to the future machine. Otherwise, the whole decade becomes a story about a nicer life in the present and a much weaker life later. I have said for many years that the investor's great enemy is not the market. It is the investor himself. That remains true here. The market is not usually what causes people to miss compounding. Their own impatience does. Their own interruptions, their own boredom, their own need for emotional proof too early. That is why the 8-4-3 rule works. It places your emotions in the correct decade of the process. The first 8 years are not there to make you feel rich. They are there to make you unbreakable. The next 4 years are there to teach you that staying put was not pointless. The final 3 years are where the process starts doing enough visible work that the earlier loyalty looks wise instead of strange. That is the order. And once you see that order clearly, the whole subject feels less insulting. You stop looking at your small beginning and asking whether it is too small. You start asking whether your behavior is correct enough that the beginning can become something larger. That is a much more useful question. I do not care whether your monthly contribution is $200 or $600 or $38 tucked in between chaotic bills. I care whether it repeats. I care whether the system is designed to survive your ordinary bad moods. I care whether you have built enough reserve not to sell every time life behaves badly. I care whether you understand what stage you are in. That understanding alone can save years. Too many people look at the early stage and say, I am not getting anywhere. What they mean is, I am not being congratulated yet by the number on the screen. That is different. You are getting somewhere if the shares are stacking. You are getting somewhere if the habit is becoming ordinary. You are getting somewhere if the machine survives your difficult months. You are getting somewhere if you are becoming the kind of person who buys the future instead of waiting to feel ready for it. That is where the real wealth begins, long before the balance looks impressive. That is why I am always more interested in behavior than in current size. Size can grow. Behavior is harder. But if the behavior is right, size eventually follows more often than people think. If the behavior is wrong, even large temporary gains can leave a person. So if you are discouraged, remember this: the slowness is not proof of failure. The slowness is part of the design. The scoreboard is misleading you because you are judging an engine building phase by the standards of a fully operating machine. That is unfair to the process, and it is expensive for the owner. Compounding is not supposed to impress you early. It is supposed to change your life later. Your task is simple: stay alive for the handoff. That is the whole game, not brilliance, not prediction, not timing. Survival, loyal accumulation, a repeatable mechanism, a structure strong enough to carry you through the years when the account feels too small to justify your effort. Because one day, if you stay, the effort and the account stop being two different things. The account starts helping, then later the account starts surprising you. Then much later, people around you call it discipline, as though the word explains what it cost. What it cost was not genius. It cost patience during the years when patience felt stupid. That is the price. It is a good price. Pay it long enough, and very few people will be able to stop what the machine has begun doing for you.